103. The number of murders if you add up all the innocent people killed by serial killers in Mindhunter Season 2. But what did the show leave out? Who exactly are these real-life killers? Join me as we take a deep dive into the real-life killers of Mindhunter Season 2. Number 10. William Henry Hance, 4 murders. A former Marine turned Army truck driver, Hance began his rampage in 1978, all 4 of his victims being women. Hance taunted police by sending letters signed by the Forces of Evil, a fictitious group of 7 white vigilantes who threatened to kill a black hostage if the stalking strangler wasn't apprehended. At the time, another series of murders were threatening Georgia, that of the stalking strangler, a man not featured in Mindhunter but was suspected of the deaths of 7 elderly white women. Hance used these murders to divert attention away from himself and his own brutal murders. 2 of the women he targeted were black sex workers and 2 were Army privates, although one of these murders he was never charged with. Robert Ressler, one of the FBI agents of which Mindhunter is based off, was responsible for creating Hance's psychological profile. From the letters and telephone calls, he asserted that the killer was one man, not 7, black, not white, single, uneducated, and likely a low-ranking military man at the fort in his late 20s. This profile led officers to stake out nearby fort bars, ones frequented predominantly by black soldiers, and were quickly able to identify Hance and arrest him. Ressler's profile had successfully narrowed down the list of suspects. Hance was executed via electric chair in 1994. Number 9. David Berkowitz, aka Son of Sam, 6 murders. In the summer of 1976, the Son of Sam killer terrorized the streets of New York City, killing 6 and wounding 7. These murders, according to Berkowitz, were spurred by a demon who had manifested in his neighbor Sam's dog. Berkowitz taunted authorities by sending letters that mocked police and promised further crimes, leading to the biggest police manhunt in New York City history. He was later caught after a local resident noticed a man watching her from his car, holding a quote, dark object. She remembered that an officer had been there earlier in the morning, ticketing cars. Police found that one of these cars was Berkowitz's own, and in it they found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Omega Task Force. As seen in the show, Berkowitz loved the attention the press gave him, which led the New York State Legislature to enact the Son of Sam laws, designed to keep criminals from profiting financially from the publicity created by their crimes. In a press conference in February of 1979, Berkowitz said his previous claims of demonic possession were a hoax, and psychiatrist David Abrahamson, who was appointed Berkowitz, claimed Berkowitz had long contemplated murder to get revenge on a world he felt had rejected and hurt him. Berkowitz currently resides in the Shawangunk Correctional Facility in New York, where he goes by the name Son of Hope after becoming an evangelical Christian. Number 8. Paul Batterson, 7 murders. Although only convicted of 1 murder, that of Addison Verrill, a gay film critic for Variety magazine, he is suspected of 6 others. In the 70s, 6 corpses of men had been found dismembered in bags floating in the Hudson River. None of them have ever been identified, but police traced the clothes on them to shops in Greenwich Village that catered to the gay community. The bags reportedly had the words New York University Medical Center's Neuropsychiatric Unit, and since Batterson was a neurological technician there, he became a prime suspect, but no evidence was found linking him to the crimes. William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, who had hired Batterson for a role as a technician in the movie, later went on to say Batterson had confessed to the unsolved murders, but those claims have not been substantiated. Batterson was released from prison in 2003 and finished parole in 2008. To this day, it's unknown whether he is still alive. Number 7. Elmer Wayne Henley, 7 murders. Henley was only 17 by the time he had killed 7 people, helping abduct over a dozen more for a man by the name of Dean Corll. Between 1970 and 73, Henley brought several young men, some of them friends of his, to Corll, where the victims were subjected to torture, rape, and their eventual death. Henley later brought another young man and a 15-year-old girl to Corll who was furious Henley would bring a girl. This altercation later resulted in Corll goading Henley to shoot him, telling him he doesn't have the guts to go through with it. Well, apparently he did, because Henley shot him, set free the 2 victims, and called Pasadena police, where he confessed to the murders. In court, Henley was charged for 6 murders. His 7th, that of Dean Corll, was deemed self-defense. He currently resides at the Mark Michael Prison in Anderson County, Texas, where he's serving 99 years. He's now 63. Number 6. Charles Manson, 7 murders.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do.
Arguably the most notorious of the killers on this list, Charles Manson and his followers committed a series of 9 murders, 7 of which he was convicted for. He created what would later be known as the Manson family, a ragtag group of predominantly women, and adopted the term helter-skelter to describe an impending apocalyptic race war. These murders, according to the women, would help precipitate that war, and Manson allegedly told his followers to write the words "political piggy" and draw a Black Panther paw to frame the murders as being done by the Black Panther. Manson, as he does in the show, disputes this theory. Tex Watson, who was responsible for carrying out the infamous Sharon Tate murder, said that Manson was indeed trying to start a race war, but that the Tate murder was designed to be a copycat crime to exonerate Manson's friend, Bobby Beausoleil. Manson was given the death penalty for the role in the murders, which was later commuted to life in prison without parole after the state of California abolished the death penalty. He died of cardiac arrest in November 2017 at the age of 83. Number 5. William Jr. Pierce, 9 murders. Despite psychologists considering him dangerous, William Jr. Pierce was released on parole in 1970 for a series of crimes. In the span of 1 year, Pierce raped and murdered an estimated 9 people, 2 men and 7 women. His love for sweets, as depicted in the show, came from actual jail cell photographs and his permitted items, similar to that of a convenience store. He was known to have an IQ that barely broke 70 and argued that his confession was coerced after the sheriff physically abused him by cutting his privates. He is currently 88, serving a life sentence. Number 4. Ed Kemper, 10 murders.
Why did you keep the heads? Why did you cut them off, and why did you keep them?
Something out of my childhood. I could put it on an incident. I mean, my father chopping the heads off of our 2 pet chickens and my mother insisting that I eat them for dinner.
One of 2 returning serial killers this season, Ed Kemper, also known as the Co-Ed Killer, embarked on a murder spree from 1972 to 1973. He got the nickname Co-Ed Killer because of his affinity for picking up female students who were hitchhiking. He gained notoriety for several reasons: his stature, 6'9", high intellect, an IQ of 145, and the fact he would dismember his victims and perform irumatio on their severed heads. As a teen, he killed his grandmother and grandfather and was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. At the end of his killing spree, he would later go on to kill his mother, an event that spurred him to call the police and confess to her murder. But shockingly enough, the police didn't believe him and told him to call back at a later time. It was only when he called an officer that he personally knew that he was brought in and confessed to the other murders, saying that emotionally he couldn't handle it anymore. In custody, he tried to commit suicide twice, but failed. He currently resides at the California Medical Facility, an all-male state prison where he serves 7 years to life for each of his murders. Number 3. Dennis Rader, 10 murders.
I had many, what I call them projects. There were different people in the town that I followed, watched. Kathleen Bright was one of the next targets, I guess, as I would indicate.
How did you select her?
Just driving by one day, and I saw her go in the house with somebody else, and I thought that's a possibility.
Rader, also known as the BTK Strangler, BTK short for Bind, Torture, and Kill, is arguably Mindhunter's most mysterious killer. From 1974 to 1991, Rader committed 10 murders in the metro Wichita, Kansas area. But what makes him so fascinating is his motive of sexual sadism and, like Berkowitz, his taunting letters to police. Rader seemingly lived a double life, on one hand a devout church-going family man, while on the other a murderous sexual deviant. He was also elected president of his church's council. His spree began in 1974 with the murder of 4 members of the Otero family, a murder which is recounted in Mindhunter by one of the survivors, Kevin Bright. He would later get more brazen, even bringing one of his victims to his church where he photographed her body in various bondage positions. In 2005, Rader sent a letter to police, asking if he were to send a floppy disk, could it be traced? The police responded in a newspaper ad in the Wichita Eagle, saying it would be safe. This was a lie. In a stupid move for someone who considered himself a criminal mastermind, Rader sent a floppy disk to the police, but unbeknownst to him, the police were able to recover metadata, which contained the words Christ Lutheran Church, and that the document on the disk was last modified by someone named Dennis, the president of the church council. Rader was apprehended in February of 2005, where he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences, with a minimum of 175 years. He currently resides at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas, where he lives in solitary confinement, allowed 1 hour of exercise a day and 3 showers a week. Number 2. Wayne Bertram Williams, 24 murders.
You know, come on, we're talking about murder. The fact is, I didn't kill anybody.
Although only convicted of 2 murders, 22 others of the 28 Atlanta murders of 79 to 81 have been attributed to Bertram's. An aspiring music manager, Bertram is alleged to have lured young boys and strangled them to death. His conviction, however, was for the murder of 2 adult men in which hairs and fibers from Williams's home, car, and dog matched with the victims. Like the show depicts, Williams was first considered a suspect after police staking out a bridge along the Chattahoochee River heard a splash followed by his car crossing the bridge. He told police he was checking on an address of a potential singer, the number he gave police turning out to be fictitious. To this day, Williams maintains his innocence, and a request for a retrial in 2006 was denied by a federal judge. Williams' lawyers argued that the carpet fibers used to implicate him in the crimes wouldn't hold up to scientific scrutiny, and that the police department covered up evidence that showed the Ku Klux Klan was involved. Williams is currently 61, serving life at the Telfair State Prison in Georgia. Number 1. Dean Corll, 28+ murders. Although only mentioned through the interview with Elmer Wayne Henley in the show, Dean Corll is the serial killer with the highest kill count. From 1970 to 73, Corll abducted, raped, and tortured over 28 teenage boys and young men in what would be known as the Houston mass murders. Corll used 2 accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, to lure young men to his place with the promise of drugs and alcohol. Once impaired, he tied them to a rack and subject his victims to unimaginable torture. Corll was known as the Candyman Killer because his family owned and operated a candy factory in Houston Heights. He had also been known to give free candy to local children. Corll's death at the hands of Elmer Henley marked the end of the Houston murders. Henley later showed police where the bodies were buried, 17 at a rented boat shed, 6 on a beach near Boulevard Peninsula, 4 near Lake Sam Rayburn, and 1 on another beach in Jefferson County. Corll currently serves an eternity in hell without parole. That's it for this list of the real-life killers of Mindhunter Season 2. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you haven't checked out my other video on Mindhunter Season 2, make sure to give it a look. You can also follow me on Twitter at ThinkStoryYT. And remember, Daddy loves you very much.